So we have a product called Insights, which I use all the time, where I can actually, the first thing I did was, so I ran community marketing for open source at VMware and Pivotal before, and I came here and I said, oh, I know we have these different open source agent languages that our customers can use. How do I find out what the breakdown is? And so I went into Insights, and all I had to do was do a SQL type query, and I didn't know any SQL, but kind of figured it out and got these beautiful graphs of like showing, you know, what percentage of our company uses Java versus Ruby versus Python versus .NET, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a great software analytic tool that we have. I run the developer relations and community marketing team. I call that a type of word-of-mouth marketing and influencer marketing. So, you know, we live in an age where you listen to your friends more than you listen to a TV ad, or you listen more to someone that you follow on Twitter that you really respect in a particular space than you would listen to, you know, ironically we have a lot of billboards, but, you know, more than you might listen to a billboard. So that's basically what my team does. We have a bunch of community managers and developer advocates that help connect with our community of users and community of friends to help spread the word about New Relic. Hello, thanks for coming. And so one of the things that we do is we host meetups, and we have lots of different groups here. And fortunately for me, I run my own, so I use this space. So anyway, for this group, we usually meet every 2 weeks, and we are starting out by learning the fundamentals of programming and in Java, and it really made sense to also include Apex because it is mostly Java, and a lot of us were coming from different business or project management or like marketing backgrounds where our mindset was a little bit more practical. So, you know, we're still, if you're interested in joining us and continuing on, we still do meet, and we have a section where we're going through different coursework to learn the basics of programming in Java, and so you can talk to me if you're interested in joining that. We all have day jobs, so we all do the homework, but we do it at our own speed, and you know, we don't criticize ourselves if we're behind. We just, the important thing is to learn and help each other out. And now that we have, you know, Trailhead's been around for a while, and I thought it was really exciting. It's worked out perfectly that for people who want to learn Apex, we basically come together and go through Trailhead together, and you know, the rule around having a women's group, not that it's a gender thing, but it's something I took from Women Who Code that I didn't see in the men's groups, was a very nurturing, safe environment where there's no such thing as a dumb question, and everybody really just jumps up and helps each other, and you learn more by teaching, right? And it's very exciting to teach someone else something that maybe you learned just 2 weeks ago, and you know, you reinforce that knowledge. So this is what this group is about, and today's a little bit different. We have this great speaker who will be giving us an intro to Apex, or Apex triggers specifically. So it's a great way to start our evening, and then after that we'll figure out what we can do. You know, we can continue to have the conversation, or if people want to go into Trailhead, it's pretty much up for what people want to do. Usually we end at about like 8:30. I'll let Kieren introduce herself, and we'll take it from there. Yeah. And if you're new, we have food in the back, we have plates and silverware. If there's anything you're missing, just let me know. The women's restroom is right here, and to the left of it is water and tea, primarily, and some coffee if you like. And if you're a guy, which is rare for today, we're doing an exception, you go past the elevators, and then I believe it's to the left, there's a men's restroom. Thanks.
Excellent. I am so thrilled to be here. My name is Kieren Jackson. I work for a nonprofit as the Digital Solutions Manager, which is kind of sort of like a product manager and an IT manager rolled into one, and then I do whatever else, other duties as required. I'm also the co-founder of a coding group called Rad Women, which is a new program that we just founded this year for advanced Salesforce admins, women who've been working in Salesforce as an administrator for at least 2 years, and we teach you free to code. It's a 10-week program. It's quite intense, but we do it in small groups where we have a curriculum, there's small groups, there's 2 coaches per group, it's all remote learning. And we did one pilot program, and we're revising the curriculum, and we'll be doing another one in the new year. Also, I'm a Salesforce MVP, which basically means that I'm a customer of Salesforce, but I advocate a lot for how to use it better and help the community out as much as possible. I also blog on womencodeheroes.com, which is, I'm a non-traditional technologist, so I didn't do a computer science degree, I did a library degree instead. I didn't even think about doing computer science, it just wasn't in my realm. But I've worked in technology for 20 years. So I am very interested. My kind of niche within the community is to help people, especially women and underrepresented populations, how to learn to code on force.com, because I think it's an amazing platform for the ability. It's pretty easy to understand what the declarative side, the point and click side does, and then to make that leap between the declarative to the programmatic is something that I think is eminently doable, so I like to help people do that. You can follow me on Twitter. I am on Twittering constantly, and check out my LinkedIn. But today, what I'm going to show you through is one of the things that is different between Java and Apex, and that is the trigger. So if you've been doing Java for a while, I've done a little bit of Java, but there is sort of this concept of a trigger is it's not actually unique to Salesforce. If you've ever worked in databases, there's a lot of triggers in databases. But today I'm going to go through what is an Apex trigger, a bit about how it's structured, some before and after triggers. We'll get into what that means, and where do you put that code, and some best practices, and then I'm going to show a little demo. And then we can have some questions and answers, and where do you go next? But please feel free to interrupt as I go along, and if I think that we'll answer it, I'll talk about it later. So what are triggers? So basically what triggers are is you can think of them as the listener. So they are hanging out in the back end of Salesforce, and they're listening for various things to happen within Salesforce in terms of the database. So they're listening for any time you insert something into a database, you create a new record, you update a record, you delete something, you undelete it, you might merge it. So it's kind of excitable. It's like just waiting for that thing to happen, and it's like, right, I know what to do. And so all of the code that you have in your trigger that's running all of the stuff is what we'll talk about a little bit later, but that is what is getting triggered. So you have an event that's in the database, you insert something, or you add a record, and then it kicks off this code. And there's sort of two ways that you can do it. There's a best practices way, which is what I'll show you today. But basically you can either put all your code in the trigger itself, or you can do more object-oriented programming, which is you link to like a class or a file, a class basically, that's going to contain all of the code that you want to do. So that's the big picture. It's a code that is listening for a database event of some kind, and then it's going to do something. So that's the big picture. So what can you do with triggers? One of the things you can do is you can compare the data before you make a change and after you make a change. So, obviously not with an insert, if there's no before on an insert, but if you're updating something, you can kind of compare what the data was like before the change and after the change, and maybe do some data validation with that. You can create and update new related or unrelated records, and that's one of the things that I'll show you in the demo later, is we're going to create through the user interface a record, and based on that record we're going to create some other records. On my blog I do a lot of stuff related to cooking, because I knew I was going to be doing something for women, and I didn't want to do any of my examples on cars. So I was thinking, what should I do? And I looked at my stove and I thought, oh, it's perfect. I'm going to write about cooking it. So we're going to look at a recipe, my recipe database that I have in Salesforce, and we're going to be creating record stubs of a review, as if every recipe needs a review, right? So we're going to create that stub automatically.
So a trigger can be used with a custom object too?
Yes. So, yeah.
So are, some other custom apps you have in there?
Mm-hmm. Basically, all of your business process that you want to do is an automated way. So it's a way of doing automated business process.
Okay.
So when I do this thing, I want all of these other things to happen. So when I create a record, I want to create all these other records. So a more traditional way of doing it, maybe you're, well, you work for the Jewish Community Center. So when you create a new user, maybe you want to create
an I account.
Yes, I don't know what that is, but yes.
Arts and ideas for for donations.
Yes. So if you wanted to add them to if you wanted to add a schedule of when you want to pick them about giving you money, then you might create a series of activities that are in the future based on a schedule.
Okay, so you could have an arts and ideas, somebody that bought tickets for a performance and one object come in, have some triggers that select certain information based on a new account or a new contact, and then to create another trigger maybe that goes to another object.
So anything that you could do in terms of your business process, so take it away from the technology side of things. If you have a business process that when someone comes in and they sign up for a new account, that there's certain things that need to happen. So maybe that you need to make them an ID card, and you need to make them, give them a schedule, or add them to a mailing list.
Okay.
So all of those things are business processes.
Right.
And they can happen manually, or you can automate them. I mean, obviously creating a card, it's a pretty manual process, but anything like that you can automate, you can do through a trigger. You can do it with Salesforce. You can do it with other things as well. Like Point and Click tools, you may have looked in Trailhead on some of the process builder or workflow stuff.
I think one of the automation that Salesforce provides is the validation for the zip codes and the states, right? So this is very direct. If you're entering the zip code, then the state automatically comes up.
Yeah, so
that's an example of
that is an example of automation. Yes, absolutely. And so what you can do, for example, here's another example. What if you wanted to clone a record? So Salesforce gives you an automated way of cloning a record, but what if, for example, this is something I built this week, what if when you clone a record, maybe it's tied to an external database, and so, for example, we use a product called Pardot, which is marketing automation, and you can think of it as a big email marketing tool. And when you have, so every record has the profile URL that takes you to the profile in Pardot, right? But when you clone the record and you change the name, it's going to keep that existing profile URL that doesn't relate to the person that you're adding now, because you may have cloned the record, but it's actually going to be a different person. So you want to go in, so I just built a process that will go in and delete all of the, if it's a cloned account, delete all of the Pardot related stuff, because it doesn't make any sense. It's duplicates. Right.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, or no duplicates, but also that the data makes sense to what is in there, because there's some data that makes no sense. So it's really any business process that you can think of. You can either, often you have a couple of different choices. You can either do it with the point and click tools, and then when it gets beyond that, or it gets very complicated, or you want to control the order that you want to do things in, that's when Apex comes in handy. And hopefully you're not cringing too much in the background. Yeah. Brad is a consultant. I'm not a consultant. He knows way more about this than I do. The other thing you can do with Apex and triggers is that you can hook up with external data sources, and you can hook up with different web services. So, for example, maybe when your business is around having service requests that come in. So a case, somebody will call up and say, I have a problem with my printer. And so you log a case in Salesforce. And maybe when the status change or there's the case is really, really overdue, and you want to make sure that the person who is responsible for that case knows about it, you could send an email, right? But what if you really want to get obnoxious about it and you want to send them a text message? Well, you can do that through SMS message systems that you can trigger with Apex and triggers. So these are just examples, and again, this is an intro to triggers, but I wanted to set the scene, and then we'll see it in action. So there's this idea of a before trigger and an after trigger, and the reason why it's important is because so when you click the save button or the create button or the merge button or the clone button, actually no, not clone. Sorry, back up, not clone. There's a lot of stuff that's happening behind the scenes in Salesforce, and there's various things that can happen at different times. So you may have a workflow rule that's running that's more point and click, and you may have a whole bunch of other kind of automated processes. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. So when we talk about Apex triggers, we're talking about do you want to do something before you commit that data to the database, or do you want to do something after you've committed it to the database? So the types of things that you would do before you commit the data to the database is data validation. Maybe you want to do, for example, maybe you have a room booking app within your Salesforce, and you want to make sure that the room that you're currently booking with someone isn't already booked. So you might have some data validation in your trigger that says, go out and make sure that this room isn't already booked. And if it is booked, don't commit that data to the database. Put an error message up instead that says, no, this room is already booked. So that's an example of something that you can use in a before trigger. After triggers are really great for creating additional records, and that's what we're going to use today. We're going to see that. So what you can do with an after trigger is, based on this change that I just made in the database, do something else. So create a new record, or go out and maybe you created a new I don't know, maybe there's something where you want to query the database for every record that's kind of related to this. So that you can, maybe it's a case and you want to look at all of the other cases that sort of are like this, that are closed, and then you want to present a list of those cases, because maybe one of those cases will help you solve this one. So there's various things you can do. We're going to see a really simple example. But yeah, so that's the difference between before and after, and for those of you who are visual, like me, and hopefully you can see this, if you can, come up closer. But what you're going to do is you can see that the same things are sort of happening with a before and after, but they're happening at different times. So you can do something before you insert, you can do something before you update, you can do something before you delete. But you can't do before you undelete, which is a really interesting one, I think. And the triggers that are available for after triggers is after you insert, do something, after you update, do something, after you delete, do something, after you undelete, do something. And you can combine these things. So it's quite common to have something that after you insert or update, do this thing. And that's one of the ones that we're going to see today. So if you look at this, so you make a change in Salesforce at the top, and the trigger gets very excited and says, oh, I know what to do. And then it's going to look and say, well, are you wanting to do something before the data is committed or after? If it's before, then the trigger is going to call a method in a class. Does everybody know what a method in a class is? Anybody not know, I should say. So it's going to call code that's going to do stuff. I'm being recorded, so I'm not going to say shit, but there you go. And then, so then it's going to maybe validate some data, it's going to maybe compare new and old data, maybe it's going to, so there's all sorts of stuff that you can happen. And then it's going to commit the data to, if all things go well, it's going to commit the data to the database and you're done. Whereas if it's a after trigger, it's going to commit the data to the database and then do something. It's going to create new records, or it's going to query the database, or whatever it's going to do. And then it's going to do that stuff, and then it's going to end. So it's not actually, most of the time what you're going to do is before triggers, although, strangely enough, I tend to create more after triggers. I don't know why.
So in terms of data validation, like there's the point and click validation, right? So, but if I have a situation where I want to first validate this field, if
this field is this valid and validate another field. Is that something
Right.
you have
Yeah.
to do with trigger, but not the
You
point and click validation?
I don't know, look over my shoulder, but I think that you can probably do some of that stuff with Process Builder now.
What's the
but,
question?
If you, like if you wanted to do a series of validations, so based on the data that's entered, if it's this kind of data, do this, and validate these other things, or do some other process. And if it's this data, do something else. You can definitely do that with Process Builder,
It
and
just takes a long time to build that. And
It-
by that point,
yeah.
you have to ask yourself, are you spending so much time building process and building all those forks, is it worthwhile? Or is it faster and easier to maintain in the long run with Apex?
yeah.
Those are very different conversations.
And I think that there's no cut and dry, there's sort of like that middle ground where it's like, you want to do as much as you can with point and click generally, because it's easier for regular people to maintain it, not like us, we're not regular people, we're like super powered women code heroes. But, generally you want to do that, but there are some times when you do want to do it in code, and that for me, that is when your business process gets so complicated that if something went wrong and you would have to troubleshoot it, you'd look in like 17 different places, that can get really complicated. If you want to really control the order that things happen in, because if you've got a series of point and click workflow rules, they happen randomly at whatever like schedule. I mean, it's when something happens, but you can't control what order they come in, where you can in a trigger. So you have a lot more control, and then with power comes responsibility. You have to make sure that it's working right. It does take more time to maintain it, but it's still definitely a valid way of going. I love code, so I like to do that. So anyway, so this is the overview, just to kind of understand that you have some options when you're working with it. So what's the basic structure of a trigger? The trigger, you start with trigger. So this is code that's I'll show you where this lives. But you start with the word trigger, then you name the trigger, and then you say triggers act on one object. So they all start with something is happening with a particular object. So you name whatever object it is that you want the trigger to run in, and then you give the context. Is it a before insert, an after insert, after update, before update, like all of those sorts of things. So here's an example down below, and it's going to be the example that we use today, and that is trigger. The name of the trigger is recipe on the recipe custom object, and we're going to do a before insert and a before update. Oh, I guess, no, well, in our code we're going to do an after, whatever. This is just an example. And then you could run some code there. Now, best practices is you don't stick all the code that you actually want to run in there. You actually link to code in a separate class. And the reason why you want to do that is because you want to abstract your code and have it be as reusable as possible. Plus, there's this idea of unit testing. Have you talked about unit testing at all in your Java and stuff? Okay, so unit testing is where it's actually required in Salesforce. So that's one big thing that you have to know. When you do code in Salesforce, you have to have at least 75% test coverage. And basically what that means is if you've got 100 lines of code, you need to have at least 75 lines of that code covered with some test that says it's doing what it's supposed to do, roughly. You can do some terrible things where you're actually not testing anything, but that's what you should be doing. And Salesforce won't let you actually deploy any code until you have at least 75% test coverage. And so what unit tests do is they say, okay, so if this thing is supposed to test when I insert something into the database, that X, Y, and Z is supposed to happen, then you're going to write a little piece of code that's going to test, here's me inserting this thing, and here's what I expect the result to be, and did it actually happen? So what you're doing is just testing your code, to make sure that it actually works. Seems like a good idea. What happens if, so I won't go into that because that's a whole different topic. But
Sorry, and could you back up to what you were talking about before you
Sure.
talked about the unit testing about having different classes? Can you say that one more time?
yeah, so you can, where it says on line 2 here, where it says code to run here, you could stick all your code in there so that you have, this is recipe, and you're going to put all your code in there, right? You could do that. But the problem with that is that then when you do you can't reuse any of that code because it exists in this trigger. It doesn't, you can't call it from any other trigger. And the other thing that's not so great about it is that it doesn't allow you to create unit tests that are specific to some functionality. So if you separate out, and we'll show an example, but if you have in here instead, do this, and it's going to link to another file, another class file that's going to do something, and then do this, and then do this, and then do this, then each of those classes that you're going out to, you can run discrete tests on, so that you are not like having this behemoth of code that you have to manage. So that's the best practice, and that's the only one I'm going to show, although this whole talk is based on a blog post that I wrote, so you can go in and have a look at what bad practices is, or less than suboptimal practice.
Will you show us an example of how to link?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're getting there. We're almost done with the whole talking part, and then I'll show the part will be coming up.
I have a question. So you say you have to do unit tests. So do you have to do unit tests on the classes and stuff?
Yes.
And the trigger?
Everything needs to be covered.
Okay.
But everything needs to be covered. But if you write your triggers with very minimal business logic in it, like all of your business logic is going to be somewhere else pretty much, then there's really not that much to cover. But I'll show you. So here's the not so good practice and the but very common practice, and that is you make a change, your trigger has all of the code in it that's going to do stuff, and then it ends. This is a much better practice, which is you make a change, your trigger is going to call one or more classes, and the classes are going to contain the code that does stuff, and then it ends. And again, it's easier to understand your code, you can reuse it, it's easier to control the order that things happen in, and you can write these little distinct unit tests that are not so overwhelming to review. So, that's the theory. Let's look at some practice. So this is an example that we're going to look at. So just to give you an idea of the data structure, we have one custom object. So in Salesforce, all custom objects start and end with __c. So you can't really see, but there's 2 underscores in there. And its ID relates to a review custom object. So the review has its own ID, and it's tied to a single recipe. So each recipe can have multiple reviews, but each review only has one recipe. So I really should have a little chicken's foot there or whatever.
Is this like parents?
Yes, so this is the parent, these are the children. One turkey dinner, many reviews of turkey dinner, or turkey. And then each of the reviews is owned by someone, so someone wrote it. And that's going to tie to our standard user table. So this is the user table. There's lots more fields in every single one of these. But, name, where they live, what their birth date is, all that kind of stuff is going to live in there. And there's only one reviewer. So this is one-to-one. I will change this if I ever do this presentation again so that it's clearer. So that's sort of the overview. So what are we going to do? So what we're going to do, so our use case is anytime we add or update a recipe in Salesforce, if it doesn't have a review, we're going to create a stub record, like a mini record that's going to contain some information that we can then go in and change later. And it's going to be assigned to someone, it's going to have a due date in it, and then we could put all sorts of automated process around that. So we could say, send someone a reminder when it's like a week before that review is done. Again, kind of silly examples, but whatever, that's what occurs to me when I'm writing a blog post. So the way this trigger is going to work, what's going to happen is we're making a change to a record in the database, so we're creating a recipe. The trigger is listening on that recipe object and is like, oh, okay, something happened, what happened? Oh, it inserted, okay, yeah, I know what to do. I'm responsible for knowing, I'm the traffic person to know what should happen. We're going to stick all of the records that were created because, okay, so when you're in Salesforce and you're actually physically going in and creating a new record, you're only creating one record at a time, right? But what if you were importing 1,000 records? You don't want to run this trigger, the same trigger 1,000 times. Salesforce will scream at you and will stop working, and it doesn't, there's all of these limits of what, because it's a multi-tenant environment. It wants you to be a really good tenant and not use all the resources. So the way that you do it is you create a bucket, a collection, and you put all of the recipes that you just created in that bucket. And that bucket is called trigger.new, so that's all the new records that you created. And then you do something with that list of records or collection of records. So then we're going to loop through all the records, and we're going to create the reviews for any recipe that needs a review. And then we're going to put all of those reviews in another list, and then we're going to send that list as a unit up to Salesforce and say, do your thing, go and insert them. So again, we're going to look at all of the recipes that we just inserted or updated, stick them in a bucket, loop through that bucket and create whatever reviews that we need and stick them in another bucket, and then send that bucket to Salesforce using this thing called DML, which is Database Manipulation Language, which is a really big word for a very little thing that I'll show you. But basically it says go in and insert them. That's what we're going to do. So, before we get into the code.
Yeah. Is the bucket created as a separate list, or is it a custom list, or is it other objects?
Yeah, so I'm not going to really get into it, but there's this whole difference between Java and Apex and variables, so how long static variables, how long they can exist. Static variables, the only thing that, and I can't really get into the big details of it, but this is what I know. The variables, this variable, this list, is basically an array in Java. And it only exists while that trigger is being run. So you don't have to do any garbage cleanup. What's it called? Is that what it's called in Java?
Garbage collection.
Garbage collection. I knew that it wasn't cleanup. I could just say it's a New Zealand way of saying something. Even though that's not true. So these are created. They're created when the trigger starts running. They're used during that trigger, and then they go away. Okay? But we're going to look at all of this code. Yes?
So you said that if it was a lot of items, it would Salesforce don't like that. So what's kind of the optimal, what's
Okay,
the
so
limit?
yeah, so there's this thing called governor limits, which is Salesforce's way of enforcing that you're a good tenant. And you can only do, and it enforces how many queries you can run within a single transaction, so a single trigger event. It enforces, or any linked, so any of your classes that are linked to it, it's going to count how many times that you do a SOQL query. Well, so SOQL is a Salesforce object query language. It's based on SQL. But you can only query with it. You can't insert anything with it or update anything. So it's really just select statements, basically. So it controls how many times you can do that. I think it's 150, I believe. And it controls how many times you can send a record up to the database and use DML, which basically says insert. So that's why you stick them in these buckets, because you don't have to worry about it. If you stick it in a bucket and send the bucket to Salesforce, then it's just one DML statement and you're good to go.
So that's if you use that CRM demand tools for or some other data loader to put the data in, it's all going to function if you have, I don't know if there's a record limit on that, but let's say.
There is. Well, they batch it, but that's sort of different. So this is all automated, whereas that is more, here's my spreadsheet or my CSV file, and I'm going to use this tool. But they will batch it for that very reason.
Okay.
Because any time you're sending data, it doesn't matter what tool you're using, in and out of Salesforce, you're going to have those limits. And I can talk more about that. I want to get to going way more into that. I'm so glad that I can actually answer the questions.
One last question. Regarding this bucket again.
Yes.
Is this a tool that is developed and prepared already for usage in
No, you create. Well, the list as a tool exists, but you create what it is, what what it's gonna, and I'll show you, we'll show you an example. I'll show you an example. You say what it contains. So for example, in this is going to contain recipes. It can't contain any other thing. It's going to contain recipes. This is going to contain reviews. It can't contain anything else. So you define, and I'll show you an example. I think it's probably easier to just show it. So let's have a demo. This is where I always forget how this works with multiple screens. Oh, good. Yay, my screen. So this is Salesforce. It's my, it's not Witch, Women Code Heroes. Although it could be witchy, I don't know. Depending on how good a mood I'm in. So this is my Salesforce instance. Oh, so with Salesforce, I don't know if you know this, you probably do since you've been working in Trailhead, but you can have any number of developer environments where you can create whatever you want. I have like 20. In fact, I kind of lost this one the other day. I was like, oh no, all of my recipes, stuff is in there. I had to figure out where it was. But you can have all manner of them. And they're just mini environments. They're yours as long as you want them. And in fact, I don't even know if you can get rid of them. I think they just always exist.
Oh, I take that back. I think after 18 months of non-activity,
Okay.
they'll take them. They start to recover that.
Okay, well
That's a soft limit.
Very smart of them. So this is where I have a little custom app here that has my recipes. I'll show you quickly. So here's my recipes. Pavlova, great New Zealand dessert.
Can you zoom in?
Oh my god, it's so good.
Hey, Kieren. It's Kieren. Can you zoom in?
Oh yeah. So let's look at hot cross buns. They are an Easter related baked dessert, which is basically a raisin. It's a raisin bun with a cross on top. It's, New Zealand's very secular, but we do love our baked goods. Yeah. Right? Excellent. So this is my recipe object, completely custom object. It has cooking time, preparation time, total time is a function of adding these two things together. I have categories, I have levels of difficulty, what you would want to do it. I mean, all of this is basically because I write a blog and I need things to do stuff with. And then down the bottom here we have reviews. So multiple people might review something. And so you can create as many reviews as you want. But I'm lazy, which makes a good programmer, right? Which means that I don't want to create the review myself. I mean, I want to fill it out. Obviously, I need to do that. But I don't want to actually have to go in and click that new button. It's so last century. I think it would be great if Salesforce did it for me. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at how to do that. So I'm going to do this.
Sorry.
Yep.
So is this? Would this be for a website that you create where there'd be a whole UI and people would be?
Could be.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's
Absolutely.
a mobile app.
Very quickly, my own
mobile
little.
app and reviews.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah, think of like Jamie Oliver little app,
Yeah.
but Kieren Jameson little app, yeah. TM
Okay.
little app.
So people wouldn't be in Salesforce proper to be reviewing, obviously.
Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of reviewers right now. They're all me, but I like to future-proof, and so yeah, silly examples, but there you go. But if anybody has like a business they want to like get with me on about this, you're all smart women, I'm totally down with that.
But you just gave me an idea for all the bookmarks that I made in Facebook for recipes to kind of pull them down to something.
There you go. Maybe I need to create a little unmanaged package. Haven't done that yet. So this is all created in the setup. I'll just show you the recipe object. Oh, I hate that. I don't know why it does that. Hang on, wait, that's not gonna work. That will work in Lightning Experience. What I really need to do is object. And here's my recipe object. And it has a whole bunch of custom fields. So this is what the label is on the custom field, and this is what they call the API name, but this is the name that we're going to use when we refer to a field in Apex. This is what we're going to use. And then these are the types of fields they are, and blah, 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 all of that sort of stuff. You've probably seen a lot of this.
Is that a good practice to have the double underscore and C for the API name?
It will create it for you. So you go in, plug in to edit this.
Oh, so it's given by the
Yeah. So it's going to say, what do you want the field name to do? It will automatically put So custom fields and custom objects both have underscore C automatically there. And that's because what if Salesforce what if they were to create a recipe object? And then I would be, SOL because if it didn't do underscore C, that name would already be taken and that would be a problem. So.
Although the best practice is not, once it's created, not to change the API name, right? Because I've seen people change that and the code can be messed
It
up.
actually won't let you. Like if this is in a class or a trigger and I try to change this, it's going to say, no, you can't do it. So
you can choose the label.
You can choose a label, absolutely. Although you still want to be careful with labels because labels are used sometimes in merge fields or
Yes.
So
Email templates, Word doc
yeah.
templates.
But it will tell you, like if I go to try and change this, it's gonna say, whoa, be careful, you don't want to do this, or maybe you don't want to do this, so I'm going to cancel out of that. So it's annoyingly accurate in terms of like, no, I really do want to change this.
So this is the trigger.
So the trigger. So
No,
let's,
but this is the trigger of validating that you are touching the field that you should.
exactly, it's a little internal trigger. Very good. So let's look at what the code looks like. So you have a built-in, within Salesforce, you have a built-in developer environment called the developer console. I use it a lot because I do a lot of training and writing on people who are new to coding. And I don't like to use a tool that puts any barriers between them and actually getting them to code, including me. I should say that just over a year ago I didn't know any Apex. So my whole blog is me learning Apex. So you can do it too. It's all good. So there's a lot of tools in here. I'm not going to go into a lot of them because I'm already like way over what I thought I was going to do. But one of there's a couple of places that I want to show you. So first of all, if you want to create a new class or a trigger, this is where you would do it. But we're going to look at something I've already done. We're going to look at the triggers. I'm going to hide all of my managed package, which basically you can install a whole bunch of packages from the App Exchange that do all manner of things. And they mostly will have a lot of like triggers and classes, and you just want to look at your own stuff. So there's this great little box down here that you can check, and we're going to look at the recipe trigger. So this is my trigger. That's the whole thing. So the trigger is the keyword. It's called recipe, so where it says recipe here, it's just the same thing. It's listening to the recipe custom object, and it's going to work after you insert and after you update. So it's going to commit the data to the database and then do something. Because what we want to do is we want to save or update that recipe and then create a review record. And then what it's going to do is it's going to look at the recipe utility class. So that's before the period, and then after the period is saying what method do you want to actually use. And this is a variable. So this says it's an array or a list, and it's the same thing basically in Apex, array and listing, the same thing. But it's a bucket. Think about the buckets earlier on. All of the recipes that you just either inserted or updated are going into that bucket. Because again, if you click new record and save, you're only doing it one time, but you could be importing a whole bunch of records. So you want the bucket to put them in, or Salesforce will go and stop working. So,
So this trigger, they always have two parameters, like in the previous example, you're having it before something.
oh no, this could just have one thing. It needs something, but you could say I just want it after insert. So you could say this should only happen when you create a record, and then you would just do after insert or before insert.
So can you have 4?
Yes, you can have all manner. And in fact, there's a best practice that you only want to have one trigger per object. so that you can really control what is happening when, and you have all of the pointers that go to the different classes. So there's a couple of different they're called design patterns or recipes that basically say I can show you an example of that afterwards. But yeah, I mean that would be the best practice. Would be to have one trigger per object, and it would have every single example of all the different options. All of the options would be in there, and then there would be basically a little if then section that would say if it's an insert, do and it's blah blah blah. I'll show it to you afterwards, but this is the simple version so that people don't get too confused. So we're doing after insert, after update, anytime something has been inserted or updated on a recipe, do this thing. So go to the recipe utility class, go to the method called create review within that, and send it a bucket full of all of the recipes that you just inserted or updated. So that's what this code does. So that's your trigger, but obviously this is not really where the good stuff happens, right? So the good stuff happens in recipe utility, the class. So I'm going to open that up.
Sorry, one more question about the trigger new. Is this somewhere that you have created somewhere? Or?
So that is a system variable. It automatically creates. So anytime you trigger something, anytime a trigger runs, it automatically creates this bucket for you, trigger.new. And this is just me referencing it, saying pass that bucket of everything that's new in there. There's more to it than that, but that's the big picture. And actually, if you want to read the rest of my article, it's all in there.
So speaking of your blog,
yes.
do you call out the best practices? I find that those are very valuable.
Yes, and when I don't, I have a lot of people who help me by saying, could you please use and then I revise it. But I do get people to review everything, even though I'm learning it as I write it. I always have people doing code reviews, so generally I'm panicked if I think that I'm going to put something out there that someone hasn't reviewed. So pretty much everything works. So this is the class that we're calling here. So we've got recipe utility, and we've got this class called, you probably hard to see here, but it's called recipe utility. It's the same thing because that's what it knows what to open up.
So that exists only for the duration of this trigger, or that's something that you...
It gets run for that trigger, but it exists in my org. It's part of my org now. I've created this code. It lives in my org.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, you can even look at this through the Salesforce, I'll show you where it lives. I mean, this is just easier to see. It does pretty colors, and it does code completion, and there's some cool stuff in here. So this is my, it's a public class, which means that the trigger can call it. If it was a private class, it couldn't be called from outside of that class. If that doesn't make sense to you, ignore it. It doesn't really matter right now. But pretty much, if you're going to call a class from a utility, from a trigger, you need to make it a public class. This is just the name of the class. Again, it relates to what we're calling it here and also back here. This is the name of it. And then in here, this create review is a method. Now, our recipe utility could have all manner of methods in it. It could have one that creates a review. It could have one that sets a due date, or it could have one that calculates based on some algorithm. Instead of me going in and saying this is a difficult recipe or a time-consuming recipe, it could go in and calculate that for me. It could say, oh, if it's a dessert and it takes more than 3 hours to make, then make it a difficult one. Or if it's, so I have actually done some things in there in my code somewhere that does that. I don't know if it's in here. No. But right now, this only has one method in it, and the method is called create review. And it's taking, so right now we're sending it a bucket or a list of all of the recipes that we just created or we updated. And this is where we stick that. So this is what the bucket is called, or where that bucket lives within our method. So we're passing in that bucket, and this is where it's caught. So it's like the method is saying, oh, I need something. I need a bucket of all of the recipes that you just made or updated. And so this is when I think you were asking. So when you're creating a list or an array, how do you know what goes in it? Well, this is where it is. So list is just saying create a list. This is saying what kind of list. It's a list of recipes, and this is what it's called, list recipes. So when I highlight this, and you can see down below, this is where that list is getting used. So this is where we label it, and then this is where it gets used. So then everything between the curly braces is the code that's getting run. So you can see here, I like to put a lot of comments in my code, especially when I need to talk on it later. It really helps to know what it is without having to really look at it a lot. So I like to put in a comment. So in Apex, the two forward slashes basically mean everything after this is going to be a comment on this line. So this is a single line comment. So I like to say, so I don't lose my parentheses and where they relate to, what this is actually closing. So that's why I have that there. So everything between these parentheses is what's getting run. And so we're going to set a couple of date variables here because I need the review to have a due date. So what I'm saying here is create a date, call it ddate, so that's the name of the variable, and then I'm using a built-in, the today method that's built into the date class. So there's a whole bunch of things that come with, just like Java has a whole bunch of stuff that you can do with strings and all sorts of other things that are built into Java. Apex has the same thing. So there's a date class, there's a date time class, there's object classes, there's all sorts of stuff. And so within the date class, it has this method that's today, which guess what it does? It says what is today. So we're setting today's date to be ddate, and then we're going to add 1 month to the ddate. So basically, we're creating today, and then we're making it 1 month from today, and that's when the due date is. Then we're going to create an empty bucket, and it's going to eventually contain all of the reviews that we're creating. So again, we're creating an array, a list. It's going to contain reviews. It's going to be called new review, and this is just where we are creating it actually. So I don't want to get into too much of the syntax, but there's a lot of different ways of creating a list variable, but this is one of them. So then what we're going to do is we're going to loop through all of the recipes that we trigger.new is our bucket of recipes, and we're passing it into this method, and then it's called, within the method, that bucket, we just renamed it to list recipes, and this is where we get to loop over it. So this syntax here it's called a for loop. Basically says, for every record that we have in this bucket, do something, okay? So for, you don't have to think about this too much, but this is the name. When we're using each of the records that we just passed in, so it's looping over all of the recipes in our bucket, but when we want to reference the things in that recipe, that one recipe, the individual one that we're looping through, each time we loop, what is it going to be called? So we're going to use the word recipe to refer to the individual recipe that we're looping over in this, whatever iteration we're looping over. And we're looping over again, we're looping over the list of recipes. And then what are we going to do? If, we're going to do an if statement. So if something is true, then do this. If it's not true, don't do anything. So if the number of reviews, which is basically a field that is looking up how many reviews does this recipe have already. Now if it's new, it's not going to have any, right? But if it's updated, it may have one already, and we don't want to create, every time we update a recipe, we don't want to create a new review, right? We only want to create it if there isn't one already. So what we're looking at is this field that says, that basically is count all of the reviews that this recipe currently has. If it's null, actually it should say null or 0, whatever.
Now you're becoming technical.
Yeah. This is what you would.
If it was just very creative.
It would, yeah, but what if it was a previous one and we updated it, and so it would have 0 as a number? Because my data isn't perfect. I created this business logic to create new reviews. after I'd already created a whole bunch of recipes. So we want to catch up. I want to do cleaning up with my data as I update them. So as I update something that doesn't have a review, I want to create one. So this is not exactly perfect logic, but that's what our unit test would test. So in our unit test, we would say, what if there was 0 reviews? What if this field, number of reviews, was 0? What if it was null? Is it going to do something differently? It actually will. So we want to make sure that that's why you do unit tests, because you're testing to make sure that when the user does something, or you're inputting data that maybe isn't perfect, or is out of bounds of what you were thinking it was going to be, that it doesn't break your code. That's what unit tests are for. So anyway, back to this. So if there isn't a review, we're going to write to the debug log that we're going to create something. This is just for us to, you don't actually need to do this, but this allows us to look at our debug log and see what happened. So it's a great way when you're building code. Instead of actually creating anything first, you can stick a whole bunch of system debugs in there so that you can make sure that your code is logically doing what it should do. And once you've got, you've checked to make sure it's actually going to, the logic gates are working, then you can go in and say, okay, now you can go in and create some reviews so that you don't have to clean up a bunch of data.
Could you put a statement in there that said, it's not going to fit in this category, a number of reviews, but I still want to put the data in another bucket for some other kind of review, would you?
Yeah, absolutely. But it wouldn't be it would be where
would that be too complicating it, or?
It just depends on what you need it to do. I mean, it can do, if you decide what your business logic is, and then you write the code for that. So you can do if statements, you can do case statements, you can do nested if statements. So there's lots of different kind of logical
expressions.
Yeah, conditional expressions that you can use, and they'll be as complicated as you need it to be.
Okay.
And then obviously you're going to comment everything so that you know what you're doing later on.
Right.
So this doesn't actually do anything other than write something to the debug log, which is in Java it's like print line. It's the same sort of thing. Then we're going to create a new review, and so this code here actually creates in memory. I haven't done anything with it yet, but it creates in memory a new review. So the new review. So this is saying I want to create a new review of the review custom object. Name it my review. You'll notice down here that we're using that. We'll get to that later. And it's a new review, and it's going to have some default values for different variables. So the name is going to be review of, and then stick in, this is a concatenation, so it's going to say review of, and then stick the name of whatever the recipe is afterwards. The status is not started, we haven't started the review yet. The due date is going to be the same as that date field that we defined above. The recipe is tied to whatever recipe we just added that we're looping through. And the owner is whoever owns the recipe. So whoever the owner is on the recipe, assign that person to be the first reviewer. This could be anything. We could decide that that's going to be, the review goes into a queue and whoever gets to it first can do it. We could decide that we're going to do a software query and decide who has the least number of reviews, and we can stick it in there. So there's lots of different ways that you can do it. But this is what, as a simple example. So this basically creates one of those balls, those review balls that we're going to put in the bucket. This creates it, and this sticks it in the bucket. So it's adding, because we have this, let me scroll back up. So we have this list here, new reviews, this empty list, this empty bucket. This is down here is where we put that review in the bucket. So add this review that we just created to the bucket, the new reviews bucket. And then you look through every single recipe that you've inserted or updated, and when you get to the end, you've added all of those reviews to your new reviews, and then this is the DML, database manipulation language. That's why I say it's a really big word for something really small, because basically all it is, that language in quotes, is insert this thing, or update this thing, or delete this thing. I mean, there's like 5 or 6 things you can do. Anyway, so this is what sends that basket, that bucket of your reviews up to Salesforce and inserts all of the new reviews. And then you end the method, and then you end the class. So, understandable?
So all those fields are the fields that are on that custom object that you showed us.
Yep.
So you wouldn't be creating any new fields there. All your fields have already
Yep.
been created on your custom object that you're gonna use
Yes.
for your Apex trigger. No matter what you're doing,
Yep.
they should have always been there. Okay.
I don't actually think you can create
I'm just asking, I don't know.
Create what?
new fields on the fly. You can't. You have to create fields first, right?
Different API.
Yeah.
You can use the metadata API to create fields.
Oh, you're right.
So yes, you can, but not in this example.
Okay.
Right.
It's frowned upon. I think it's a term
It's
we use.
frowned upon, okay.
I can imagine that maybe you would create like a temporary table to do something, but
Done
So
that.
one custom object, one field for this trigger.
well, we have a variety of fields.
Right, but you only have one custom object, is that correct?
That's all I'm doing in this. All I'm doing
But
is
we could have two?
You can have as many as you need.
as many as you need. Yeah, you can create new reviews. You could send an email to the owner to say, guess what, you've got a new review and here's the URL for it. You could text message.
Okay.
You can almost send out a smoke signal, but you can't.
Please
There's no
don't lie.
API.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
one object to the tag,
What do you
For a
listening
DML
to-
statement?
You're
You can
listening
create
to
one.
one object, but you can affect as many as you want within your code. So you're listening to the recipe object with your trigger, that's way back at the beginning here. You're listening for an insert or an update to a recipe, but you can work with as many objects as you want. So you could create new, so depending on what your business logic is. And this particular example is just saying I want to create a review. So let's see it in action, so that you don't think that I'm full of smoke. So what kind of recipe would we want to create?
Cranberry sauce.
Cranberry sauce. And how long does it take?
An hour.
1 hour. I think that's
hard.
preparation time. That's the cooking time. It's not.
I was gonna say 2 minutes.
Let's say that the cooking time is half an hour and the preparation time is maybe half an hour.
Okay.
We're just gonna say that. And it is gonna be
The main course.
a side dish of a, Ben? God, thank you. I need someone who doesn't speak English as a first language to tell me how to spell English in my own language.
Just gonna record it.
Awesome.
I noticed you put like 45 time, but
This
would you be
is-
able to set it to maybe?
Absolutely, I just
Okay.
didn't, that's how I created my field.
Okay.
But you can do whatever I could do this in minutes, I could actually put it in minutes and it could calculate what the percentage, it could do all of that stuff. I'm gonna say it's easy, it's an easy dish to make. And I'm gonna assign it to, let's see, or it's attributed. The owner is me, but I'm attributing it. So in my theoretical recipe app, this is who sent me the recipe. Yeah. So I'm gonna save this. And here's my recipe. Look! It's a review! Yay!
That's so quick.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I just blinked on this.
Like that. So,
Very awesome.
let's go back and see if we have any other things we need to say.
So we can do a, good. Oh, I was gonna say, we can do a meetup potluck next time and we'll just.
Yeah! Totally!
So you can try to update it if you want.
Oh yeah, well, let's delete that review and see what happens when we update it. Oh, actually, no, let's update it and then we'll delete the review. So if I edit this and say, it's in fact,
You're in your PowerPoint right now.
Oh, I am? Sorry. They're really doing stuff over here. Thank you.
Bueller.
Yeah, there it is. Okay, so I'm editing my, oh, actually, no, I don't want to edit review. I want to edit the recipe. So here's my cranberry sauce, and I'm going to edit it, and I'm going to say that it's not actually Artie Green, it is someone else, Amanda Smith. I'm going to save it. So there should still only be one review here. Yes, there is. And it's what I don't know if you can see the time, but it's 22 and it's actually 23. Well, here we are. Oh, yeah. So this says 23 after, and this is 22, so you know that this wasn't affected. But I'm going to delete this. And we're going to edit it again, and it should. Right?
It's waiting.
Yes, you're sure.
It's wants to know if you're sure.
Two. Oh.
Here it
No,
goes.
you're not
There's a new
sure.
one.
Because you didn't have
Yeah, but why did it?
24.
We created a new one, it's not the same.
I know, but why did it not? Why is it? That seems weird. It should have let me just delete it and have it be blank. But I guess it's not going to let me do that. Well, then that's unintended consequences, right? So that's one of the things that we might want to put in a unit test. Is, what do we really want to do here? Because what I don't know is, what if I wanted to delete that and assign it to somebody else, or you're thinking why it would happen?
I don't know if have we already met the bucket with our cranberry sauce?
Yes, we have, because all those variables, all those buckets, they only exist when your trigger is running. They don't exist afterwards, which is different from Java.
Don't explicitly call to exit a recipe for
Yeah. Or some parts of Java. My knowledge of Java is like head first Java book, got through it. So, yeah. So, yeah. Any questions before we?
So I'm curious about how, Salesforce obviously was built around kind of core concepts, lead monitoring, and all that. So
Yep.
To convert it and use it as sort of this back-end database for something completely different,
Happens all the time.
Are there areas in which there are actual limitations to Salesforce itself where
Not really.
I want to go?
I mean, of course there are going to be limits.
Yeah.
But I work for a nonprofit. We build just a ton of different stuff in our Salesforce app. Anytime I look at anybody who has a spreadsheet tracking anything, I'm like, get rid of that spreadsheet. Let's get it in Salesforce. Because what happens is, someone leaves and their spreadsheet goes with them, and you have no idea what's going on, and no one can update it at the same time. It's just bad. So we use it for all manner of stuff. And if you go on App Exchange, you'll see all sorts of apps in there to manage your expenses, to run an ERP or fulfillment system, to, there's all manner. There's whole financial systems that you can get. There's medical. There's all these apps on like running medical. What's it called?
Or they're doing that.
Medical history? No.
Electronic medical record.
Yeah. There's all sorts of stuff.
That's what the presentation was with the woman from breast cancer at the
Right.
Salesforce.
Right.
She's. I work with the woman that knows her.
Oh, very good. Yeah, so you can.
also do some education, for example, signing up for classes and.
Exactly. Yeah. So I built, for another presentation, I built a tourism app where it was tours, people were getting assigned to tours. And that's where the double booking was really not for rooms, it was for making sure that someone didn't go on two tours at the same time.
Yeah, I thought about the Airbnb.
Yeah. So,
Very good.
what do you do now? Some of this stuff you already know. lightning fast. Lightning fast. Okay, so Salesforce Trailhead, sounds like you all know about this, but for prosperity, it is a free online training with tutorials, both point and click and programmatic code stuff. There's also a whole bunch of stuff on Udacity and Pluralsight for video training. There's a great website called SFDC 99, which is Apex coding for the 99% of the rest of us who didn't go to computer science. There's a whole bunch of stuff in the Salesforce development community, which is developer.salesforce.com, which tip sheets and workbooks and cookbooks and all sorts of other stuff. And then there's my website, Women Code Heroes, which I do a whole bunch, and I'll actually show it to you because why not? I've got a captive audience. I have a whole bunch of articles that relate to all manner of Apex lingo, including, for example, relating different data types in Java and Apex. So if you're coming more from the Java side, you can kind of look at what the equivalent is and how they might differ. So things like that. And then there's the Rad Women group that if you're interested in, bit.ly/rad-women. Check it out. It's on the success communities. So if you have a developer org, you can get in there. And the only thing we have is that you should be an admin for at least 2 years because we're looking for women who are ready to make that shift. And then questions.
So how does the RAD selection process work?
Oh.
It's a lottery?
It's a lottery, yeah, because we have way too many people than we have spots. So if you were in the last round, you will get preference if you didn't make it into the last round. And if not, we will have a certain group of seats available. Right now we're looking for coaches, still looking for coaches, but we think we're going to have about 6 coaches this time. Or no, 8. I think we might have 8 coaches. And we're having up to 8 women per group, so we have a lot more room than we did before. We still won't have enough room for everybody, but we're going to be running, so the beginning course is 10 weeks, and it is, it's a commitment of about 5 hours of out-of-class time. It's a remote learning environment, so we do it all over web conferences, and we have different coaches in even different countries. We're going to have someone from India who's going to be coaching. We have 2 people from Brazil, actually, I think.
Really?
I think so. No, not Brazil. Yeah.
Carolina, because it was somebody I met actually this past conference said Dreamforce, there was a lot of people from Brazil that were actually in Salesforce. So
Yeah. So, and it's a small group environment, so there's no more than 8 learners per group, which means you get to know the people in your group and therefore hopefully build community because we like that. And then you graduate, in quotes, which basically means you make it to the end, into a graduate group so that then you can continue learning in that group and support each other, and the coaches are still there even if they're not actively coaching in the round. So yeah, this is our thing that we want to continue.
So do all the groups have like same topics that they go through?
So it's
like
the same curriculum. Everybody's working on the same curriculum. It involves some Trailhead stuff. It involves our own. We're changing it slightly, but basically you're going to have a project that you work on and you're going to cycle through the code over and over again, refining it or doing different things. And then you read my blog for some of the kind of intro stuff. And then we have exercises and we have grand plans. So the first course is by the end you should be able to read code, be able to find code out there and adapt code, but not necessarily write it from scratch. In the second intermediate course, we're going to look at writing original code and doing unit tests and all that kind of stuff. And then we have grand plans for our advanced course, which would be working on feature requests for the nonprofit starter pack, which is an open source package, unmanaged package with Salesforce Foundation. So
it would be nice if the students that go through the courses be the mentors.
That's one of the things that we ask is that you would be available, but we understand that it takes time. So it may be in a year or 2 that you would be ready to do that.
I feel like I'm only just starting to be able to, I would be able to coach now. But we pair up a more experienced coach with, sometimes we have newer coaches, and so we always have one more experienced coach so that they can handle the more tricky answers. But we also try and keep it at a beginner level so that no one feels like they need to like go beyond that. So yeah.
How frequent is it?
So we've done one course so far. We've just done one trial, and we're hoping to run maybe 3 times a year.
Oh, but like, is it like every day?
No, it's once a week for 10 weeks.
Oh.
So it's quite a commitment. It does require, you know, that's why it's very important to us that you're ready for it. And we require that you've have 2 years of experience as an admin so that you know all of the point and click tools and you know how the database works, and we don't have to go over any of that stuff. And that you're really ready. And we have a great success rate so far. We had 22 women go through our last course, and only 2 didn't make it through. And one of them was because she was in England. She was going to have to get up at 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
It seemed like
England was
Really?
okay, but yeah. That was the last thing. Yeah, because I actually met some people and asked them if they wanted to dial in. They were like, yeah, it's like 2 a.m. and I was like, yeah, I can do it. And then I got to Amsterdam. I was like, yeah, it was a wrap.
Yeah. So it's a great group of women, and we had a meetup before Dreamforce this last year, and we have a 9-person advisory committee. We're serious people. So, and it's a lot of fun.
So how do we even get on the mailing list?
So
Just join the community?
so go to the radwomen, bit.ly/radwomen, and that will get you to the public chatted group, and then we'll be promoting on that, and then from that, and we're going to be doing an informational informational session in December. So if you're interested and you have 2 years of admin experience.
That Salesforce Trailhead, that has Apex code that you can
Yes, so
plagiarize more or less.
it is, but they don't have not necessarily doing best practices. So they're teaching you how to do it, but they don't always have best practices in there. Like they will show you a trigger that has all of your code in it. Because it's just easier to show that, but it's not. So, yes, you can learn it, but supplement with other things, like Women Code Heroes or SFDC 99 has a lot of best practices stuff.
It's cool to go through the challenges.
And you can get badges, and it's awesome. And now you can put your badges on LinkedIn.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. And they just redesigned it, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even the badges that we have all one?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
I haven't looked at it yet. I'm like, do I put my 60 badges on there? Probably.
Probably not.
Yeah. So, any other questions? Was this helpful?
Yes.
Yeah, it's very
Thank
good.
you.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you very much.
Okay.
We actually started, 3 meetups ago, we started using the Trailhead Apex challenge, or the curriculum, and we're actually, like, I got stuck and, we just asked
It's
each
kind
other
of a
questions.
big leap
Still
sometimes.
didn't really see
The thing to know about Trailhead for the programmatic side of things is that their audience for that was not people like us who are learning to code for the first time. Their audience was people who already know how to do Java or .NET or C# or whatever, something object-oriented, and are learning to do it on Salesforce. So they were actually extremely surprised at how many people were trying to do it, and they are looking at doing, and I might be involved, who knows, in writing trials for more new programmers. So that would be really cool. But in the meantime, you have resources, so it's all good.
Thank you.
Yeah.